House resumes and debate continues. I recognize the Honorable Grant. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to make my contribution to this year's budget, 2022-2023. I also seek your permission, Mr. Speaker, so that I could refer to some of my notes.
Permission granted.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here today with a deep feeling of joy and pride of all the plans which are projected in this financial year. But, Mr. Speaker, as parliamentary representative for the Wesley constituency, I am once again pleased with the measures and plans and the progress, Mr. Speaker, for the international airport. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister informed this Honorable House that China Railway Engineering Group, CR5, has been selected to construct the international airport. Mr. Speaker, what this means is during this fiscal year, we will see a lot more activity in the Wesley constituency. Mr. Speaker, my people of Wesley, Woodford Hill, and Palm Tree, we stand to benefit directly from this large investment. Mr. Speaker, over $24 million have already been paid to homeowners. Mr. Speaker, the Joe Burton development is one of the most beautiful housing development in this country at this time. Mr. Speaker, we have seen the evidence of increased economic activity in the constituency of Wesley. Our shops, our bars, our restaurants, they are all making money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have already seen franchised businesses leaving Roseau and coming to the Wesley constituency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the last few months, I have received calls from 2 large supermarket owners, Mr. Speaker, and they are looking for land in excess of 10 acres in the Wesley constituency to put down businesses, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I present to you tonight, there's a shortage of houses to rent in the Wesley constituency. Mr. Speaker, existing homeowners are expanding to incorporate bed and breakfast in their residence, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, several young men from my constituency are currently employed on the housing program, Mr. Speaker. Even at the lab, Mr. Speaker, we have young men from the Wesley constituency learning at the lab at the Wesley. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on. But it's no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that we have already begun to see the improvements in the community and the infrastructure because of this international airport, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for this generation and generations to come, the Wesley constituency, Mr. Speaker, and Dominica will benefit from this international airport. Mr. Speaker, dynamic Dominica is taking shape in the Wesley constituency. Mr. Speaker, I have done so in the past, Mr. Speaker, and I cannot do so enough. I would like to express my profound gratitude to the people of Wesley, Woodford Hill, and Palm Tree for the level of cooperation that we have seen in the construction of this international airport, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to inform this Honorable House that homeowners who have to be relocated have already started receiving their keys to move in at Joe Burton. Mr. Speaker, I would like to express my thanks to the Honorable Prime Minister, who continues to lead with a steady, fair hand and a level head, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to express my gratitude to the Honorable Prime Minister for entrusting me to lead the agriculture and fisheries sector, Mr. Speaker, in these challenging times. Mr. Speaker, I would like to express my thanks also to my colleagues who have supported us during this financial year. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank the Minister of Planning, Dr. Henderson, the Cabinet Secretary, Ms. Prevost, the Financial Secretary, Ms. Edwards, the PS in the Office of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Henderson, and all the public officers who contributed to this budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today representing over 4,000 farmers and over 500 fisher folk on this island, Mr. Speaker, from the largest to the smallest. Mr. Speaker, these are our food heroes, Mr. Speaker, and I take my responsibility very seriously. Mr. Speaker, it is for that reason, during the last fiscal year, I have charged the ministry to get out of the office. We have visited farms. We have drove the feeder roads. We have visited the boathouses. We have visited the landing site, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have also engaged a number of supermarkets, the hucksters, the boat captains, and a host of other stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we believe our farmers and fisher folk deserve to be honored and rewarded. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would like to pause to congratulate Mr. D.Les Warrington of Calibishi, Mr. Speaker, who was awarded in October 2021 the CARICOM Farmer of the Year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the same year, the ministry also rewarded 10 deserving farmers and fisher folk across the island. Mr. Speaker, this award ceremony will continue as an annual event and will pursue tangible awards, Mr. Speaker, for our farmers and fisher folk. Mr. Speaker, this Labour Party-led administration has invested hundreds of millions in the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the past 5 years following Hurricane Maria, we have invested over $145 million, Mr. Speaker, in the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, $145 million. This money was used in strengthening, empowering, and building back a stronger sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the last fiscal year, no stone has been left unturned. Mr. Speaker, the investment this Labour Party administration has made in the sector is bearing fruit. Mr. Speaker, I will demonstrate that this Labour Party government is transforming the agriculture and fishery sector as we know it. Mr. Speaker, we are creating opportunities for employment for our young people. We are creating employment opportunities where they could create generational wealth in the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, we are building the agriculture and fisheries sector to be resilient, innovative, inclusive, sustainable, but most importantly, Mr. Speaker, internationally competitive. Mr. Speaker, I must, however, speak of some of the accomplishments we had in the last fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, despite all the challenges that we face, COVID-19, rising oil prices, logistic challenges, Mr. Speaker, the agriculture sector here in Dominica is on an upward trajectory. Mr. Speaker, the fact is there is a much wider variety of fruits available than we had 20 or 25 years ago here in the Commonwealth of Dominica, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is undeniable that our produce are of the highest quality, and there is an increasing demand for our produce. Mr. Speaker, in the last fiscal year, we harvested, over 50 million pounds of produce. Mr. Speaker, this is a deliberate attempt and targeted efforts by the ministry and the government, Mr. Speaker. And we have expanded the output in selected crops, some of which include yams, dasheen, turmeric, ginger, passion fruit, and white potatoes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last fiscal year, we had seen over 200 white potato farmers planted the white potato, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we continue to see the Ministry of Agriculture providing support to these farmers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have provided agrochemicals, we have provided fertilizer, and we have provided tilling services to a number of farmers in this particular sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is the aim of the ministry, along with the Ministry of Trade, to approach 2 planting seasons in this fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we speak of accomplishments, Mr. Speaker, I need to make note of our partnership with the Chinese Technical Mission, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the last fiscal year, we distributed, Mr. Speaker, at concessionary prices, over 300,000 high-quality seedlings, over 5,000 flower seedlings, Mr. Speaker, over 6,000 fruit trees. Mr. Speaker, we distributed just under 1,000 dragon fruit seedlings across Dominica. Mr. Speaker, dragon fruit has become increasingly popular because of the health benefits, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, locally, one fruit goes for 30 EC dollars. Mr. Speaker, in our neighboring islands, one fruit goes for 40 EC dollars a pound, Mr. Speaker. And this is the kind of production that we are going into in the fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Chinese Technical Mission did not only provide high-quality seedlings, Mr. Speaker. They provided training opportunities for over 336 Dominicans, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the People's Republic of China, Dr. Sun, and his team for their efforts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of us do not like to hear about Hurricane Maria, Mr. Speaker. Hurricane Maria was a mere 5 years ago. Mr. Speaker, we have a set of persons here in this honorable house who tend to glorify their miserable performance between 1995 and 2000. Mr. Speaker, they want to tell Dominicans that they are the alternative. Mr. Speaker, if there is anything in this world that is as destructive as Hurricane Maria, it is the UWP, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, UWP brought us to ground zero. Mr. Speaker, Maria brought us to ground zero. Mr. Speaker, we needed 10 years. Mr. Speaker, maybe 22, because we are still recovering from the UWP, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, that's right.
Mr. Speaker, again, I would like to express my thanks to the Honorable Prime Minister for his intervention in the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through the World Bank program, which is part loan, part grant, Mr. Speaker, we have provided support to over 4,300 farmers, including vouchers for fertilizer, agrochemicals, tools, and equipment. Mr. Speaker, Under the livestock component, Mr. Speaker, we have approved 190 farmers which would see improvements to their livestock holding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have distributed engines in excess of $1.7 million. And Mr. Speaker, we are in the process of building 53 boats for our fisher folk, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under the infrastructure component, Mr. Speaker, we will see improvements to a number of our regional offices, Mr. Speaker. The first office to be repaired under this program, Mr. Speaker, is the Northeast Regional Office at Londonderry. This office serves farmers from Concord to Anzime, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the ministry has been working, and the evidence is clear. Mr. Speaker, in the whole thrust to digitize the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker, we have been paying attention to our data. Mr. Speaker, in the last fiscal year, we have exported over 30 million pounds, Mr. Speaker, to our neighboring islands in the north. Mr. Speaker, this data does not include the airports and ferry services, Mr. Speaker. This is just coming from the Longhouse, Mr. Speaker, at Portsmouth. Mr. Speaker, we have seen a number of persons, Mr. Speaker, lawyers, doctors, accountants, moving into farming, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is what you call money meeting money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these professionals went into agriculture knowing well and they are confident that the economic climate that exists for them, Mr. Speaker, they are confident, Mr. Speaker, that there are markets for their produce. Mr. Speaker, that is what you call transforming the sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the past, farming and agriculture used to be something for the poor, the uneducated, the man from the country, not the affluent, Mr. Speaker. But this is changing. Mr. Speaker, no longer you hear farmers talking about, I'm going to rear a few birds or I'm going to plant a piece of land, Mr. Speaker. They are saying they are going to invest in the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is how the measures and progress can grow. Mr. Speaker, that is how these measures are growing the economy and the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the notable achievements for us in the ministry, Mr. Speaker, is the training of 8 drone pilots, 8 extension officers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we have seen the benefits of this intervention, Mr. Speaker. These drones will be able to capture data, crop size, crop quantity, and elevation profiles, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this new technology will improve the data collection at the ministry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Salisbury is disturbing me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am speaking about digitization of the economy, Mr. Speaker. I am speaking about ICT, information technology, Mr. Speaker, and he sits on his degree at his home on Facebook. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my brother, you don't win elections on Facebook, you know. Additionally, Mr. Speaker,
you cannot see my brother, you see.
The member for Salisbury, you don't win elections on Facebook, my brother. Mr. Speaker, with the support of the UNDP, Mr. Speaker, we saw 45 extension officers receiving personal equipment, Mr. Speaker, boots, raincoats, and gloves, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the government, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the UNDP and the government of Japan for their support. Mr. Speaker, on the restoration project, Mr. Speaker, we have invested over $250,000 in training of our extension officers with the University of the West Indies. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on extension, Mr. Speaker, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Felix Leslie, Mr. Speaker. He will be retiring this year after 39 years of service, Mr. Speaker. I thank him for his prayers and his advice during my time at the ministry, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to express my thanks to Mr. Revelia Centros, an extension officer in the Northeast region, Mr. Speaker, who is also retiring this year. Mr. Speaker, all these investments, what do they mean, Mr. Speaker, for the agriculture sector and Dominica? Mr. Speaker, in my travels during the last fiscal year, I came across a farmer, Mr. Speaker, and with much excitement, he's telling me about his birthday dinner at the Kempinski. Mr. Speaker, on the menu at Kempinski, Mr. Speaker, there were brandy farm prawns, Mr. Speaker, and Margot chicken breast. Mr. Speaker, when we said that we were building hotels and we were building the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker, this is what we were speaking of, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, outside of the local food which he enjoyed, Mr. Speaker, he was appreciative, like every Dominican, Mr. Speaker, to be at a 5-star resort in his own country. Mr. Speaker, this is the dynamic Dominica that this Labour Party is building. A Dominica where our young people can invest in sustainable and profitable businesses, Mr. Speaker, for a ready local market. Mr. Speaker, during the last fiscal year, we did extensive work on our hatchery at Belfast, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend and thank the work of a young Kalinago, Mr. Dorian Sanford, indeed, and the Chief Fisheries Officer, Mr. Julian Defoe, for their contribution and work in the aquaculture sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to express my gratitude to the FAO, who are working with the ministry to improve the CMOS industry to boost our commercial CMOS here on the island, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we know and have demonstrated that agriculture is at the heart of the survival of our people. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine-Russia war has caused unimaginable disruption in our food chain and an ever-increasing cost of production. Mr. Speaker, Dominica has done nothing to cause this war, but we are suffering because of it. These global events have rearranged our lives, Mr. Speaker, and the world. But, Mr. Speaker, we know if there is one thing that remains true, it is that the countries who survive in hard times are those who can feed themselves. The countries who thrive are those who can turn any crisis into an opportunity. Mr. Speaker, the countries who will continue the countries who will continue to grow are those countries who value and appreciate the agriculture and fisheries sector. The Honorable Prime Minister has charged the ministry, the cabinet, and the whole nation that we should increase the contribution of agriculture to 700 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have hit the ground running, Mr. Speaker, and plans are in place to reach this target. Mr. Speaker, this budget is designed to respond to the current world challenges, creating fresh initiatives and a cushion for our economy. This 2022 budget will not only address unemployment created by COVID-19, the incentives will create opportunities and innovation in the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. As the Honorable House heard during this year, Mr. Speaker, the government will invest $1 million in the provision of greenhouses, cover material, irrigation system, and other necessities to ensure that fresh fruits and vegetables will be available all year round. Mr. Speaker, apart from this $1 million, as I just mentioned, another $1 million will be placed in the Young Professionals Initiative. Mr. Speaker, the youth must be part of this. They must be part of this journey, Mr. Speaker, and they must be at the forefront of this revolution in the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that this investment will multiply, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank one of the extension officers, Mr. Addison Trotter, for his work, Mr. Speaker, because data has become an important part of this ministry and this government moving forward. Mr. Speaker, just speaking to one supermarket, for the last fiscal year, they imported over 60,000 pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables, some of which include watermelon, bell peppers, broccoli, cauliflower, cantaloupe, and dragon fruit, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is disturbing the amount of fresh produce that we are importing. The statistics show, Mr. Speaker, that we are importing over $7 million of fresh fruits and vegetables on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker. And these measures in this budget, Mr. Speaker, will create an opportunity for the young people in this country to create millions for themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a quantum leap in this agriculture industry, Mr. Speaker, is an investment of over $13 million in the tissue culture facility at 1 Mile. Mr. Speaker, this lab will be a comprehensive facility that integrates research, teaching, and production of high-quality seedlings, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the lab has a capacity to produce at any one time 100,000 plants, Mr. Speaker, and over 500,000 plants on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker. This is a state-of-the-art facility, Mr. Speaker, once completed, and it will be staffed by our young Dominicans, again, Mr. Speaker, who will be trained in the expertise, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I express my gratitude to the People's Republic of China for yet again another gift. Mr. Speaker, we continue with our traditional crops, Mr. Speaker. Our cocoa, our coconut, our coffee, our bananas, our ginger, our turmeric, and all these crops, Mr. Speaker, are crucial to the livelihoods of our farmers, Mr. Speaker, and the ministry will continue to do work in these areas, Mr. Speaker. One of the areas that I'm excited about, Mr. Speaker, and I know a lot of farmers will be as well, Mr. Speaker, during this fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, we'll be constructing, a new citrus and propagation facility, Mr. Speaker, and this facility will be able to produce up to 50,000 seedlings on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a few weeks, maybe next week, Mr. Speaker, we'll be signing an MOU with the Cuban government, Mr. Speaker, to strengthen our citrus propagation, Mr. Speaker. The team is ready to leave Cuba and should be here shortly. I'd like to express my thanks, Mr. Speaker, to the Republic of Cuba for this gift. Mr. Speaker, we continue to provide support to our banana farmers, Mr. Speaker. And during this fiscal year, we'll see $1 million being placed to support our farmers. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the banana farmers this evening, Mr. Speaker, that your government will continue to facilitate payment of spray chemicals for the management of the black sigatoka, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to provide them with fertilizer, and we'll continue to provide them with the necessary inputs for strengthening of their farms. Mr. Speaker, Dominica boasts of one of the best cocoa beans in the world, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at our wood for tail propagation facility, Mr. Speaker, on an annual basis, we continue to produce over 25,000 cocoa plants, Mr. Speaker. And in the last fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, we established 150 acres of cocoa. Mr. Speaker, with all these investments, you definitely would have an increase in production, Mr. Speaker. And this is why in this budget, we will see $5 million being placed at next year, Mr. Speaker. And this is going to play a critical role in protecting the livelihoods and income of our farmers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is timely and critical, Mr. Speaker, and this measure will boost the confidence of our farmers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the aim of this facility is that farmers will be paid in 1 week, as we heard from the Minister of Trade, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, what is key to this facility is that the farmers will now be able to have a sales record, Mr. Speaker, proof of their earnings. And with this, Mr. Speaker, they could go to the financial institution and get a business loan, get a mortgage, get a student loan, Mr. Speaker, or a loan to expand and improve their farms. Mr. Speaker, these are the measures and policies that are empowering and building our nation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased that this facility would be reinstated. The credit facility would be reinstated for the hucksters at next year, Mr. Speaker, and this measure would provide excellent support to our farmers. Mr. Speaker, we'll be also providing support in the amount of $3.7 million to Farmer Association. Through this initiative, farmer groups will receive technical support, tools, machinery, grant, and other support that they could now provide to their members. Mr. Speaker, through this measure, you might have a small group, one of what we call, Mr. Speaker, cooperative associations, and during this measure, we'll be able to provide direct support to them so that they could better serve their members, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are increasing production, therefore we have to increase our marketing. And this is why in this budget, Mr. Speaker, we will see the establishment of regional depots. Mr. Speaker, this measure will increase the number and the volume of our products that are sold on the regional markets. Mr. Speaker, a lot of our farmers have been asking for land to plant. Mr. Speaker, the reason they're asking for land to plant, Mr. Speaker, is the confidence that they have in this government to expand, Mr. Speaker, or to go into production. I am confident that the government in the government, Mr. Speaker, that these measures and all the concessions that are already in place will increase the number of farmers as we have seen in the last years. Mr. Speaker, we are providing financial support. We are providing the concession, the technical assistance. We are making the lands available. That is how we are targeting and creating employment opportunities for our young people. We are building a Dominica, Mr. Speaker, where the youth will have an opportunity to be innovative and create streams of income and become independent, Mr. Speaker. Farm Access Road, Mr. Speaker, has been a challenge for several of our farmers, and we were able last fiscal year to spend in excess of $23 million in the repair of feeder roads, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased as the Parliament Rep for Wesley, Mr. Speaker, that work is ongoing on the Mango Gutter Road, and this is a promise that I made to the people of Wesley, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy that I'm able to keep that promise. We also see road improvements, Mr. Speaker, in the Lapland area, in the Makato, Kalibishi, Monrachet, and the Kahome feeder road. Mr. Speaker, what this intervention means, Mr. Speaker, you see an improvement to over 700 farmers. 1,500 acres will now be serviced because of these roads, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the 15 acres that are already under cultivation, it now gives farmers and other persons interested an opportunity to expand or to go into farming, because there's an additional 1,400 acres that are available now because of this intervention. Mr. Speaker, we have made progress on the blue economy, Mr. Speaker. We have plans that are well underway for marine. We are partnering with several persons, Mr. Speaker, for a marine research facility down at Longhouse. We are also on this Friday, Mr. Speaker, we'll be signing an MOU with the People's Republic of China for the development of the blue economy, Mr. Speaker. Our blue economy sector, Mr. Speaker, would have been much further, Mr. Speaker, but due to the COVID-19 restrictions, several of our key partners were unable to make it here, Mr. Speaker, but in the fiscal year, we would see work go on in the blue economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the budget, Mr. Speaker, we heard the Honorable Prime Minister indicate that value added is critical to the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker. With all this production, it has to go somewhere. And that is why we'll be strengthening our agro-producers with $5 million, Mr. Speaker, so that they can procure small machines, better labels, and improve their craft, Mr. Speaker. We would also be assisted with €155,000 through the CDB to design and conduct studies for a national agro-processing facility. We'll also see $100,000 grant to the National Essential Oil, Mr. Speaker, and we heard the amount of bail that is being produced by the Honorable Member for La Plaine, Mr. Speaker, and the government is responding accordingly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I express my thanks to all the agro-producers, Mr. Speaker. They are hard-working people, and we, as a government, as a ministry, Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we have responded to them. Mr. Speaker, I give my full support to the estimates and the measures put in this Honorable House for this fiscal year. It is important for us to remind Dominicans that the opposition will continue to make loud, empty noises, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the past 2 years, we have heard them use words like stimulus package, inflation, cushion the economy, relief. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that this Labour Party government has been giving relief to Dominicans for the last 22 years. We have built a cushion for the economy. That is why every disaster, Mr. Speaker, we are able to bounce back and build back better. Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that the same European, Mr. Speaker, have called Dominicans greedy when they take advantage of the relief measures, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, money saved is money earned. We have been helping Dominicans to save money and earn money. All the financial institutions here on island are liquid, Mr. Speaker, and the relief continues. Mr. Speaker, land worth $10 is sold for $1 a square foot. That is relief, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, housing revolution, repairs to home, construction of new homes and apartments, Mr. Speaker, that is relief. Mr. Speaker, grants to small business owners, Mr. Speaker, that is relief. Cash grants, tools, fertilizer, boats and engine free of charge to farmers and fisher folk, Mr. Speaker, that is relief. Mr. Speaker, financial assistance to hundreds of students studying overseas, that is relief, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we adjusted the tax rate. We adjusted the tax bracket. We reduced transfer fees, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I submit that is relief, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a significant portion of this year's budget has been allocated to the agriculture and fisheries sector, Mr. Speaker. I want to remind all our farmers, Mr. Speaker, of the multitude of concessions and assistance available for you by this government. Mr. Speaker, we would see further this year that VAT has been removed on tools and potting soil, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, money in the pockets of our farmers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the People's Republic of China, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the Kingdom of Morocco, the Government of Japan, Mr. Speaker, for their continued support to the Ministry of Agriculture and the Government of Dominica, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank the UNDP, ICA, FAO, WUSC, CADI, for all the support that they have given us in the last fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to express my thanks to my cabinet colleague, Minister Riviere, who joined us this year in the ministry, and I thank him for his support, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to express my thanks to the Permanent Secretary, Dr. Kira Paul, and all the staff within the ministry, Mr. Speaker, the Director, Mr. Ricky Bruman, the Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Thomas, and all the officers, Mr. Speaker, for their support during this fiscal year. The farmers of Dominica depend on us, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to support them. Farmers, all farmers and fishers, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank you. You are the backbone of the nation, and your government will continue to invest in the industry for the benefit of the country and you personally. I'd like to thank the hucksters, the supermarkets, and all the stakeholders who ship, consume, or sell produce from our farmers. Farmers and fishers, I urge you to remain vigilant during the hurricane season. Put an effective plan in place to safeguard your lives, your property, and your animals. Mr. Speaker, I make a special plea to the young people to explore the opportunities and plans that this government has put in place for them. There are adversities, Mr. Speaker, but this government has continued to create opportunities, and the young people must take their place in dynamic Dominica. Mr. Speaker, if you would allow me, I would like to touch on the constituency of Wesley. Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize...
15 more minutes.
Oh, should be all right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, firstly, I would like to recognize all the men and women under the National Employment Program, Mr. Speaker, and the Yes We Care program in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, allow me to express my profound gratitude to the supervisors and team leaders, Mr. Tom Bazil, Mrs. Anita Deja, Ms. Rosie Parillo, Ms. Casmin Robin, Ms. Verna Tavernier, Ms. Florence Telemark, and Ms. Savina Basil, Mr. Speaker. I want them to know, Mr. Speaker, I am grateful for the work that they are doing in the constituency. Mr. Speaker, during my preparation for this budget, Mr. Speaker, I took an opportunity to assign a dollar value to the social programs and government assistance that we receive in the constituency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would just like to look at one heading this evening. Transportation allowance to college students, $21,000. Salaries to the bus driver and maintenance of the school bus, $30,000. Free tuition for 21 college students. 13 students at universities have received tuition and housing. Mr. Speaker, the average cost is $55,000 per student per year. Mr. Speaker, every year, 21 students receive cash grant as they transfer from primary into high school, Mr. Speaker. That is another $10,000. Approximately 250 students at high school and primary school in the constituency. They receive books, uniform, bags, shoes, Mr. Speaker. This is estimated at over $60,000. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for Education, Mr. Speaker, because the Wesley Primary School and the Woodfordale Primary School were one of the first schools to receive devices during the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, we also provided laptops to college students, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, devices are totaling over $300,000. Mr. Speaker, and this is just on education. Mr. Speaker, I have not included. Mr. Speaker, I have not included other interventions from the housing revolution, the Rapid Response Agency, Mr. Speaker, and these interventions on an annual basis are in excess of $2 million, Mr. Speaker. On an annual basis, Wesley constituency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I cannot imagine other large constituencies like Mahu. Mr. Speaker, that is a direct investment in people. We are not talking about roads, we are not talking about buildings, Mr. Speaker. We are talking about people. And we have to continue to express our thanks to the Honorable Prime Minister for his creation of these social programs and interventions for our constituents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the last fiscal year, we targeted a number of young people to empower them. A lot of young men and young women within the constituency. Mr. Speaker, one of my initiatives, Mr. Speaker, as we call it, building community, building capacity, was created where we provided a number of training opportunities for our young people. Pastry making, electrical wiring, plumbing, and a number of areas, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the help of the Honorable Prime Minister and the Chinese Technical Mission and the staff of the ministry, I launched what we call Block to Farm, Mr. Speaker. Located at the Londonderry, at the back of the playing field, Mr. Speaker, where you saw 10 young men, and last year we incorporated young women, move from the block to the farm. They have learned life skills, Mr. Speaker, which have better equipped them, and several of these young men, Mr. Speaker, have now started their own farms because of this intervention, Mr. Speaker. We continue to plant, harvest, and sold, Mr. Speaker, lettuce, string beans, bell peppers, cantaloupe, Mr. Speaker, and this year we begin to see our dragon fruit, Mr. Speaker, and we should be selling before the end of this year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, very often our young people are criticized, but Mr. Speaker, I must say, I must applaud the young people, Mr. Speaker, for the positive that they are doing in the Wesley constituency and Woodford Hill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen a number of young people in the last 2 years.
10 more minutes.
A number of young people, Mr. Speaker, become police officers, fire officers. A lot of them have gained employment at the airport, Mr. Speaker, and that is because of the increased flights we have from American Airlines, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the Woodford Hill Propagation Center, we have 4 young propagators, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to express my thanks to these young propagators, Mr. Speaker, because they are critical to the development of the agriculture sector across the country, Mr. Speaker. We have Lenroy Coppell, Tanner James, Leon Joseph, Paul Black, Mr. Speaker, all under the leadership of our foreman from Wesley, Mr. Kel Alexander, Mr. Speaker, as we call him, Doc. Mr. Speaker, we have seen a number of young women, most of them single mothers, have gone into the production of CMOS, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Ministry of Agriculture for assisting them, along with the FAO, Mr. Speaker. Recently, we see a new species of CMOS being cultivated, and this is expected to be much more commercially viable, Mr. Speaker, and I express my thanks to the Fisheries Division for the support that they have provided, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the kind of work that is going on in the Wesley constituency, Mr. Speaker. We have seen a lot of young men move off the streets and put in their energy into positive, Mr. Speaker, and they must be commended for this. Mr. Speaker, the housing revolution was designed to provide support to vulnerable persons, Mr. Speaker. And several young people in the Wesley constituency have benefited from the $10,000 grant, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this is a significant investment for a young couple or a single person starting a home. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that during this fiscal year, we'll see the construction of over 16 resilient homes, 3 and 4 bedrooms, in Woodford Hill, in an area that we call Small Farm, Mr. Speaker. I have seen the designs. I am in discussion with the developer. We'll be meeting with contractors soon, Mr. Speaker, and work will commence on the Woodford Hill housing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many people in my constituency whom have not been reached by this housing program, Mr. Speaker. And this evening, I would like to make a solemn promise to them that your government will reach you. Mr. Speaker, as we move to the development and construction of the international airport, I plead with my young men of the constituency, the electricians, the plumbers, masons, to sharpen your skills. The Wesley constituency is on a path for transformation, and we certainly want to be and will be part of dynamic Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I remain close to my farmers. My farmers continue to benefit from the World Bank Restoration Project. They continue to receive fertilizer, tools, and cash grants. Mr. Speaker, several farmers as we speak in the Northeast region, including Wesley, are receiving materials and construction payments, Mr. Speaker, for the improvements of their pens. Mr. Speaker, back then, when you say farming, you say pickup. We often associate farming with a pickup. Mr. Speaker, in the last few years, Mr. Speaker, I have seen a number of my constituents who are involved in farming go to dealerships, Mr. Speaker, and come out with a brand new Nissan, a brand new Toyota, a brand new Mitsubishi pickup, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if farming don't have money, $100,000, where do you get it? As a farmer, Mr. Speaker, to walk into any dealership and walk out with $100,000, Mr. Speaker, it means that you are making money as a farmer. Mr. Speaker, the repair on farm roads continue, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank Renault and Caribbean Construction Limited, Mr. Speaker, for the support they have provided. I would also like to assure the farmers, Mr. Speaker, in my constituency that their feeder roads will be addressed, and most of them are already being addressed in this fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we often hear about the Londonderry playing field. In the last sitting, or the last house, Mr. Speaker, the former representative, when we received not so sober representation, Mr. Speaker, often mentioned the Londonderry playing field. But Mr. Speaker, the Londonderry playing field continues to be maintained. And we will see improvements, Mr. Speaker, to the Woodford Hill playing field. And I'm working on having that playing field lighting, Mr. Speaker, in this coming season. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the young people of Woodford Hill who continue to manage the Woody Blazers, Mr. Speaker, Nicola, Sawana, Kerry, Simone, and all the other management team, Mr. Speaker, who continue to work with the football team in Woodford Hill. Mr. Speaker, during the last 2 years, we brought back cricket to the Londonderry playing field. And I would like to thank, Mr. Speaker, another young man, Joel Mingo, who started this initiative, Mr. Speaker. He was supported by Kimani Jeremy, Odiyama, Honore, and a number of young men in the Wesley constituency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the past 10 years, we see and continue to see...
2 more minutes.
Fine.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Honorable Grant be given 5 more minutes, please.
It has been moved and seconded that the Honorable Grant be given an additional 5 more minutes. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. You are given an additional 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the past 10 years, we have seen over 5 medical doctors emerge from the Wesley constituency. Mr. Speaker, we can also boast recently, Mr. Speaker, we have one of the 2 ENT specialists at the Dominica China Friendship Hospital, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to applaud my classmate, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Warren Alistair. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, we have 3 young persons in Cuba, 2 of whom are specializing, and one of which who is just studying medicine in her 2nd year, Mr. Speaker. And again, I continue to wish the young people of Wesley and Woodford Hill well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the one university graduate per household continues to bear fruit, Mr. Speaker, and in Wesley constituency, this is no different. I would just like to express my congratulations to Ms. Samika Benjamin, a constituent of Wesley, Mr. Speaker, who emerged as valedictorian at the Grambling University this year. Mr. Speaker, since becoming part of Mr. Speaker, a lot of young persons are in pursuit of housing. And my discussions with the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister for Lands, Mr. Speaker, in this fiscal year would be making 15, to begin, Mr. Speaker, that's just a start, 15 housing lots available to public servants in the Joe Burton area, Mr. Speaker. We'll also be making prime agricultural lands available for lease for young persons interested in farming, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to express my thanks to the Minister for Tourism, the Permanent Secretary, the Chief Technical Officer for their support, Mr. Speaker. In the Wesley constituency, we have the only white sand beach on the island, Mr. Speaker, the Woodford Hill Beach. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, I commend the team at the Woodford Hill Beach, Mr. Speaker. On a Sunday, the Woodford Hill Beach has a lot of persons, and there's a lot of economic activity happening on the Woodford Hill Beach, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, and this Honorable House, that the Wesley constituency is satisfied with the work of this government. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that they are all excited about the great things that are coming to the Wesley constituency. And I can tell you, this Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, that if the polls were called tomorrow, next month, next week, whenever it is called, Mr. Speaker, the URP, as they are now, Mr. Speaker, they are having a hard time finding a candidate that can beat Fidel Grant and the Dominica Labour Party in Wesley. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the Honorable Prime Minister, Dominicans, and my people that the Wesley constituency will continue growing with Grant. Mr. Speaker, I give my full support to the budgetary estimates for the fiscal year 2022-2023. Thank you.
Yes, Honorable Luge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. I need the cameras, trust me. I do. Oh, Mr. Speaker, before I get to the meat of my presentation, there's a few responses that I must make. And I heard Agriculture Minister Grant expressing how happy he was to serve his 4,000 farmers and fishermen. But as one who served in the agricultural sector for 31 years, Mr. Grant, are you 31 years? I served for 31 years. I want to tell you, 2 decades, a little over 2 decades ago, we had about 15,000 banana farmers, plus other non-banana farmers. So 4,000 really is not much, it's not anything to shout and dance about. And then I want to tell you also that the greatest gift that could be given to farmers is 2 ships with the capability to carry 2 40-foot reefer containers, so that all the talk we have about production, that farmers will have a market. They will know how to supply these markets. Also, I was very pleased to hear President Savre, who highlighted the issue of child abuse.
Member, you cannot use the president name to support your argument.
Okay, well, it's not anything to...
It doesn't matter, whether positive or negative.
Okay, all right, all right, so I'll leave out the president. But I would like to compliment my colleague, Francisco Joseph, who spoke out on the issue of child abuse and illegal firearms, which is what I was going to say, which I don't see as a problem. And I would encourage my colleagues across the aisle to speak out firmly against child sexual abuse and the question of illegal firearms. I also heard Senator Gregory Rivera singing the praises of the abattoir, and he said how much he loved chicken breasts and how he loved pork. But I have a little news for him. In the auditor's report of June 30th, 2021, here's what the auditor had to say about the National Abattoir. So you could go to page 109.
Which report are you reading?
The auditor's report of June 30th, 2021. So let's go to page 109. National Abattoir.
I know, but before you proceed in regards to the auditor's report,
yeah,
I just want to point out to you that what you can do, you can maybe quote from the report, but you cannot start making inferences and concluding.
No. I'm just going to quote
so
from the report.
Page
I will
one.
make no
so
inferences.
Yes, quote.
I'm just going to quote
Page
109. Yeah, that's the second time you're doing that. But anyway, I'll proceed. It's okay, Honorable John. I don't need any protection at this stage. Page 109, about the abattoir. Quote, under financial management, lack of proper documentation of revenue and expenditures to promote accountability and transparency. Page 110, quote, conclusions, 5.42. In conclusion, the overall governance of the National Abattoir can be defined as inadequate. The institutional framework needs to be developed to ensure transparency within the operations of the facility. In addition, accountability is critical to ensure efficiency, which includes the proper management of public funds. On page 125, we always get in these things that Danny Luge thinks on his feet. On page 125, for the years 2017 and 2018, revenue from the abattoir, $321,308.09. And here the bombshell. Expenditure, $745,831.81. Does that sound like a place that needs to lock down and heavy padlocks put? In the year 2018, 2019, revenues, $315,860.46. And here the bombshell. Expenditure, $1,120,536.98. So when we sing in the praise of the abattoir, that is the true picture of the performance of the abattoir. Okay? Right. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know I have 30 minutes, but usually I only get about 20 minutes because of disturbances. So for that reason, I'll try to stick closely to my script. So you should allow me to, to address you.
No, you
via
have
my
to
speech.
request. You have to request
Yes,
to refer
that's
to
what
your
I'm
script.
doing now. I'm saying
No, no, you
because-
have not requested.
Well, I'm requesting. Yes. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'm requesting that I stick closely to my request is for me to. go to
Permission
my
is
script.
granted.
Yes. Permission granted? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's widely understood that the objective of a national budget are 1, reallocation of resources, 2, reducing inequalities, 3, economic stability, 4, management of public enterprises, 5, economic growth, and 6, reducing constituency disparities. Mr. Speaker, the $4.2 billion question to this 22-year-old administration is how many of these 6 objectives are being met? And the questions to all our citizens is whether you are better off 22 years later. If you are not able to meet your skyrocketing light bill and feed your family for an entire month, then the answer is a resounding no to the question as to if you are better off 22 years later. C 1704. Mr. Speaker, we were promised geothermal energy with budget allocations in the 2008 and 2009 budget, and that's on page 10, of $1,250,000 with increased allocations in every succeeding estimate. In excess of $100 million have been spent under the banner of geothermal exploration, yet not one candle is lit up via the deep geothermal wells. And the recycled refrain is that it is coming soon. Here in this budget, we see an additional allocation of $126,977,948 for a geothermal domestic plant, which will take the geothermal bill to $226,977,948. And now I move to C2105. Mr. Speaker, and yes, we have the most repeated and elusive international airport at cost estimates of $654,917,811. Now on its 4th election campaign cycle, with plan after plan hidden away and sealed in a secret briefcase labeled as classified. Site after site, fleeting funding agencies, alleged Chinese promises and denials of Beijing's government funding. Yeah, I have, sure. Meantime, residents were relocated, lands taken away, many still not compensated, and only now we hear whispers of preliminary airport studies. Studies that should have been done way before taking away the lands of the residents and their hasty relocation. Also, residents relocated to the Joe Burton area are now pleading for their certificate of title. A back-to-front, illogical approach to the largest and most costly infrastructure project in Dominica's history. Mr. Speaker, there's only one excavator on site, which begs the question, what is the real plan and intentions of this administration? An 84-year-old gentleman whose mutually agreed price for property was $900,000 is still owed in the region of $600,000. I won't name any names. C-1523. On a constituency level, since the 2014-2015 budget, page 14, we were promised in Rosenhof an indoor sporting facility in Stock Farm. And even all the promises were made on the election campaigns. So it leads me to wonder, Mr. Speaker, if C-1523 is that same old 2014 promise of a sports complex. Roseau North, a constituency, though the most populous, still unable to get its fair share of the national resources. C-1622. Mr. Speaker, we were promised a new Goodwill Secondary School following its destruction in 2017 by Hurricane Maria. Now, 5 years later, we notice a few Chinese on site and wonder if it is a grant or a loan. Was there open tender, as our tender law requires? I believe that it is over time that local contractors be given an opportunity to grow and a chance to bid for these lucrative contracts. Stop treating local professionals as a stepchild in their own homeland. In 2019, Minister of Finance and Prime Minister Scarrett promised Dominica the Ravincock Link Road, which would be a lifesaver in the event of a catastrophic rockfall under the Kenfield Cliff, which would serve the dual purpose of easier commute to the occupants of the two palaces on Mount Daniel. But not even the palace and its royal occupants can reverse the fortunes of the Roseau North constituency stepchild. D27. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to have a heart-to-heart talk with the Minister of National Security, through the Speaker's chair, of course. We are just about past mid-year 2022, and we've already had 13 murders, of which 4 or 5 happened in the Roseau North constituency, and some of the victims from my constituency. Sir, with all due respect, we have a serious crime problem in Dominica. It must not be trivialized. It must not be swept under the rug. We must confront it head on. It is not a partisan issue. We must work across the aisle and outside of this hall, bringing to the table our most talented minds, utilizing indigenous experts, whether off or on island, to address this matter. We need all hands on deck. We are all alarmed at the rapid increase in the murder of our young men. It troubles me deeply. When I see young men on motorcycles brazenly discharging live munitions on the bayfront, I wonder if they are licensed firearms and ask myself, who gave the license? And I wonder loudly if they are not licensed firearms. You have the video, Mr. Commissioner of Police. Go pick up the snipers and Navy SEALs, for God's sake. If our police service don't take charge, the gangs will. And all we will have is the law of the jungle, where revenge killing never stops. At about 2 p.m. today, right in the middle of Roseau, another gun-related crime. Are you aware of that, Mr. Speaker? We see the police high command allocating numerous manpower to intimidate peaceful Wednesday walkers, while real crimes...
member, you
Yes.
cannot say that part.
What I can say?
The part about intimidating.
Okay, I withdraw intimidate. While real crimes, like the 2 barrels of guns and their owners, walk away scot-free with not as much as a slap on the wrist. US $500,000 was seized, Mr. Speaker, and not a drumbeat is heard. Dead silence, no movement in the courts, no jail time for suspect. Then you ask citizens to cooperate with the police when you have evidence in a vault and suspects released on bail. C-1511.
Again, this the suspect released on bail and all that. This is imputing improper motive on the actual institution. You must withdraw that.
The suspects were released on bail. Mr.
Yeah, well,
Speaker.
I don't know.
Don't say that.
We don't know exactly what you're talking about.
I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. I want to complete my presentation. So anytime you ask me to withdraw, I will withdraw. C-1511. Now to our health services, Mr. Speaker, and our China Friendship Hospital.
Honorable member, if you want to make a point, you need to go back to your seat and do the thing
I
properly.
continue in the meantime, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, can you tell me what in God's name is happening there? Why are we treating our most senior medical consultants?
Honorable Luge,
Yes.
the Honorable Minister, are you going to stand on a point of order, Honorable Minister?
Let him say. Don't tell him. Don't suggest to him
No,
why
but he's standing, so I need to know.
No, but I mean, I'm standing too. I'm standing too.
Yes.
So he must say why he stand.
Yes, he's standing on a point of order, so you need to sit down. One second, Honorable Minister. Hold on. Press yours now.
By speaking.
What's the point of order?
And
What's the point of order?
Chair, Mr. Speaker, he is actually referencing a very important point on national security. On a point of correction, Mr. Speaker, you referenced a point of a gun-related crime in Rosa today. There was a question of the police actually was in the process of apprehending somebody, and as a result, the police had to fire some shots to subdue that person. I wanted to correct that. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your clarification.
So-
Obviously, I couldn't
So,
have that kind of detail.
so member,
Yes.
so on the point of correction, so you're incorrect to assume that it was not the police. You need-
I didn't say, I never mentioned
Nice.
about police.
Nice. So you see.
No.
So
No.
nice.
No.
So,
Look
so
the
you
record
see,
there.
when you make
Look the record, I never
general
mentioned
state-
police.
So that's why I was cautioning about the general statement. So proceed.
The record, look, they have the record there, you know. Stop saying that I said certain things when I didn't say. I never mentioned about police. Okay? Now, 1511 to our health services, Mr. Speaker, and our China Friendship Hospital. Mr. Speaker, can you tell me what in God's name is happening there? Why are we treating our most senior medical consultants in such a disrespectful manner? What do I mean? Well, is it not true that the contract offered by the new hospital authority to our medical consultants proposed to remove their established private practice, a norm enjoyed for decades? And is it also true that these consultants were called to sign their contracts without prior notification and fair opportunity to peruse the new terms? Is that not holding a gun to the heads of our most qualified medical practitioners? And why the rush? Is that how we treat our indigenous consultants, while foreign professionals are treated with respect? No wonder some of our talented young doctors run away to other Caribbean islands, where their services and skill is respected and rewarded with better compensation packages. Mr. Minister of Health, I understand that we now have a hospital authority, but for the sake of patients and clients of the hospital, please pay attention to what is going on there before we lose all our local consultants. Dr. Pascal, our indigenous ENT, was run out of the public practice to be replaced by a Cuban colleague who is older than Dr. Pascal. This is not good for our patients. It is not good for the morale of the senior doctors, and the younger professionals are observing how you treat their seniors. P1405, National Employment Program. Mr. Speaker, how much more time I have? You have to add about 10 more minutes, sir. Remember that. National Employment Program. Mr. Speaker, total historical expenditure plus forward estimates for the NEP from 2019 to 2022 is $228,612,484.
Yes, you have 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes.
Yeah, based on regular
adding?
time. You might have to ask for more time.
No. You can add more time
I
based
know.
on the disturbances.
Continue.
So, as I was saying, from 2019 to 2022, $228,612,484 to include the budget year 2022-2023, and that's for the National Employment Program. So, Mr. Speaker, what was meant to be a temporary training and mentorship initiative, transitioning trainees into permanent private employment is now a quick fix, feel-good, never-ending temporary arrangement. Did anyone tell you, Mr. Speaker, that NEP workers cannot get a loan from any financial institution based on their temporary NEP status? So one may ask, what is my free advice to Prime Minister Skerrit concerning the NEP? Here's what I propose from our side. 1, the purchase of 2 ships with the capacity to haul at least 2 40-foot refrigerated containers to supply well-packaged agri-supplies and light manufactured Dominican products going north and south of Dominica on a weekly basis. Minister Grant, you should listen to this. Suggestion number 2, make Crown lands available to civil servants and private citizens with an affinity for agriculture in their own rural community with the goal of increasing production for food security, supply of regional and international markets, as well as encourage light manufacturing. And suggestion number 3, set up 2 medium to large fruit bottling plants to meet the increased production encouraged by initiatives 1 and 2, which were just suggested. Enterprises like Benjo Simas, Local Juiceman, Carl's Hot Sauce, Cafrina's Hot Sauce, and a host of other budding entrepreneurs waiting for that extra push of financial and technical assistance. And importantly, opening up the regional markets. Yes, Ian, you heard about Cafrina's Hot Sauce? Ha! I know you would pick that up. Mr. Speaker, then and only then will indigenous Dominicans truly create wealth, opening up hundreds of new jobs to self-employed farmers, businessmen, entrepreneurs, no longer relying on the meager NEP earnings of $600 to $1,000 monthly. Mr. Speaker, do you know of any millionaires that was created in the past 20 years? In the past, we had people like Suki, Mr. Charles, you know, millionaires. The only millionaires I know of now is passport agents, you know. But from hard creative work, no new millionaires was created under this administration. Now, if Prime Minister Skerrit answered to me that he can do those things, my question to Prime Minister Skerrit is, why haven't you done it in 22 years? Okay, so you can say you could do it, but you didn't do it. And if you cannot report that you've done it in 22 years, I don't think you can do it. Elections, I come to elections, P2103. If $1 million is adequate to give us the following before even thinking of calling another general election in the Commonwealth of Dominica, then and only then, Mr. Speaker, you are on the right track. If not, as Senator Joseph said, we are provoking the people. So here is what this 1 million allocation must accomplish as a minimum. 1, voter ID cards. 2, cleansing of the voter register and complete re-registration in the Commonwealth of Dominica. 3, access to DBS and GIS for the parliamentary opposition and other political parties. And 4, campaign finance regulations. Mr. Speaker, electoral reform has been one of the most vexing issues in Dominica since 2005. And now that our apex court has spoken, I think even the Attorney General should listen and take notice of the very strong clarion call by the CCJ. Here is what the CCJ says about elections in Dominica. 1, quote, future elections in Dominica ought not to proceed with these or similar terms, meaning that elections in the vein of the 2019 election must never occur again. Mr. Speaker, did you get this? Prime Minister Skerrit and Attorney General Levi Peters, do you understand that it is game over? On the issue of using the wrong voters list, Justice Drago ruled that this is a pattern non-compliance with Section 17 of the Registration of Electors Act, but went on to set this aside. However, the Apex Court, the CCJ, in paragraph 88 of the ruling, insists this is a matter of the most serious concern that ought to be investigated irrespective of the outcome of this appeal and of these petitions. Mr. Attorney General, you serve the people of Dominica. Will you institute an immediate investigation as the CCJ so ordered? In paragraph 100 of the CCJ ruling, they emphasize, and I quote, that non-compliance of electoral laws in this regard is an eventuality that the court must resolutely set its face against. Mr. Attorney General, there is no way of misinterpreting or misunderstanding what the CCJ is saying, even for a lay lawyer, a bush lawyer like me. We've got to fix this. We've got to fix this broken and tainted election machinery now, with no further delay and no $500,000 excuses. And let me say to the Chief Elections Officer, sir,
2 more minutes.
it's okay, I will wrap up. Let me say to the Chief Elections Officer, sir, you've heard from our highest court that
You need to address the speaker, not the chief election officer.
yes, okay, to the speaker.
You address
to
through
the Chief
chair.
Elections Officer through the speaker. Sir, you've heard from our highest court that our elections are tainted. Sir, we sadly did not get a cleanup of the final 29 electors list. The laws of Dominica is behind you to immediately clean up the voters register. You do not have to wait on any report from anyone to do your work. Your position and office is protected by law, so go ahead and do the right thing. Housing. Mr. Speaker, we have at least 4 separate heads for housing. Question to Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, do you know who is the Minister of Housing and why is this portfolio held by more than one minister? Mr. Speaker, what we have in Dominica is that the citizens who are highly favored, they will get apartments valued at $250,000 to $350,000 free of charge. Others, also full-blooded and born Dominicans, will contract loans for the same price apartments to be repaid in 15 to 20 years. While others who sings the blues can't get a free apartment nor a mortgage apartment because they do not qualify
One more
by
minute.
virtue of their color coding. All of these homes, which are funded by our CBI money, grant, or loans to be repaid through lifetime mortgages, yet what we see and hear unfolding is institutionalized, in-your-face discrimination from every angle. So the conclusion on the matter is that the most highly favored Dominicans who breathe red-hot oxygen deserves free houses according to the gospel of the good doctor. But loyal civil servants must pay for their homes or not get at all based on age discrimination. Is this fair distribution of the national wealth, Mr. Speaker? Or is this election patronage 101? Just the last sentence.
So 30 seconds.
We are quote, I give you a house, so you must keep me in the house, unquote. Is this what we have here, Mr. Speaker? Because of time constraints, I'll stop it. I don't want anybody to fall asleep here.
Honorable Minister, you wanted to make a point now, so your time is up.
I hope you can deliver like me.
Honorable Minister, you need to clarify something?
Mr. Chairman, to that hour of the night, to want to sleep on Danny, really not making, I mean, really, what Danny was saying, you sexual lies and innuendos, imputing improper motives. Because what he really said is that there's discrimination in the housing program, and that's imputing, and it must be blue or, you know, I mean, but.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this Honorable House be adjourned until Thursday, 28th July 2022 at 10 a.m.
10 a.m.
Yes.
Second, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be adjourned until Thursday, 28th July at 10 a.m. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House stands adjourned until Thursday, 20th July at 10 a.m.